Welcome back, guys. This is Roland from Graphic in Motion, and this is part 6, the final part of our light bulb explosion video tutorial series. In this part, we are going to After Effects and we will import our OpenEXR sequence. We will create a quick composite and then we will add some nice things like a shockwave, like glow, like smoke. We will of course composite our logo into our scene, and then we will finalize this project so that we have a nice end product that you can then use on your videos. So before we get started inside After Effects, let me quickly mention that this project is also available as an After Effects template on VideoHive and on my website. So you do not have to do all of this work that you saw. You can just purchase it and use it for your videos. You will also get a license so that everything is perfectly correct, that you can use it on YouTube or whatever channel you want. But if you want to learn how to do it, then let's jump right into After Effects and let's get started. So before I move to After Effects, I have to do a few changes in my Cinema 4D project because I need a few additional things to create my composite in After Effects. First of all, what I need is the position of my logo inside our 3D space. So let me quickly turn on my Redshift render. And if you take a look here, I cut out this piece of filament here to place in my logo inside After Effects, but I don't have this 3D position. So I need to create a null object. Oops, this was a cube, sorry. Let's create a null object and let's call this our logo position. And now let's make sure that this null object is really exactly in the middle of our filament. So let's come in here, let's drag it up, and let's just make sure that this little null is right in the middle of our filament right here. And now let's add in here a render tag, and in this case we need an external compositing tag. And I can specify that it will create a solid, and yeah, I can make this maybe a little bit smaller, 100 times 50 or whatever. And I will change the color here just to make it a bit more beautiful, something bluish here. And this will then later create a solid in After Effects that's already in the right position. And I can use this then to position my logo in After Effects. Now, the next data that I need is the camera data. Right now, our camera is driven by this align to spline tag. And this is an expression actually, and After Effects is not able to read it. So if I import this camera into After Effects, then there is no animation on it. What I have to do to get this data over to After Effects is that I have to bake my camera. And to bake your camera, you enter your timeline, make sure that your camera is selected here, and then you go to Functions and choose Bake Objects. Make sure that you bake the entire scene, of course. Here we have all these checked, and here we need position, rotation, and animated parameters, but actually we would not even need this. Position would be enough, but I just leave it like that because it really doesn't matter. And right now you see that Cinema 4D created keyframes on the Y and the Z position. This is exactly the values that are changing, and this is exactly what After Effects will then be able to read and to import and to recreate this camera inside After Effects. Good, so we are set with our 3D data. Another thing that I need is, I cut out this filament on my last frame, or in the last part of the animation. But I actually need one version of my last frame, of frame 249, where the whole filament is visible. So how can we do that? We created these two filaments here. So I have this short one and I have the full one. And I just exchanged these by using these object tags and their visibility settings. So let's just turn this off for a moment. Let's turn off these visibility settings and let's make sure that our filament short is just invisible in our render. Now I only have my filament long in here. And I want to export this frame, only the last frame now, with two AOV passes. First of all, I want to have a beauty pass that it is exported by default, and I also want to have an alpha matte of my filament. And to get this, I will use an AOV called the puzzle matte. So let me show you how to set this up. So I already changed my output here to make sure that I only export the current frame, which is frame 249. Then I will use the same settings here. I will use the same OpenEXR format that I used before, but I changed the name here to filament. And then we go to Redshift, and in my AOVs, I deleted everything and I added a puzzle mat. And the puzzle mat is the following. The puzzle mat will create mats either for a material or an object, and you can actually store 3 different object IDs in one file on the red channel, on the green channel, and on the blue channel. Right now it is set up like the following. Red channel is set to object ID 0, green channel is set to object ID 1, and blue channel is set to object ID 2. On my object tag that I already had here on my filament, I changed the object ID to 1 now, and if I create a quick bucket render now, you will see that this creates an alpha mat on the green channel that we then can use in After Effects to separate our filament from the beauty path. And this is exactly what I need. So with only these settings, with only these 2 passes, so the standard pass that is saved anyway and the puzzle mat, I will now render this, or I already rendered this frame. And now everything is set up and we can move to After Effects and import our EXR sequence and start the composite. So now inside After Effects, before we import our footage, let's take a look at some settings that are important. So first of all, in preferences, we have this import settings here. And these are important because actually our frame rate was set to 25 frames in Cinema 4D, and you have to make sure that this sequence footage frame rate here is the same as in Cinema 4D. The default here is 30, so I changed this to 25 already. And there is another thing that is important for us, and that is the setting here of our project, the project settings. We want the depth here to be 32 bits, and we want the workspace to be sRGB, and we want to linearize the workflow. This is very important because otherwise our footage will not look right. So with all that set up, let's import our EXR sequence. And let's move to our folder where I rendered this. So let's go to import here, and you see here I have my sequence that's called light bulb explosion, and I have the filament. So this is the file that I exported in the end, the last frame here, but for now I want to import my sequence. Make sure that OpenEXR sequence is checked, and we will import this as composition. You can leave these things here as is and click OK, and After Effects will create this folder here. And you see here we have this assemble composition. If I open this up, you will see that here are all my passes here stacked on top of each other exactly as we wanted. And this is also the composition where we are building our composite. Then we have this contact sheet, and this is pretty cool. Here you can take a look at all your passes in one composition, nicely arranged. We don't need it, but maybe it's useful for some reasons. So in my case, I will just close it and go back to my assemble. And now we will take a look how we can really composite and use our passes. So the top pass here is the RGB pass. And let's turn this off for a moment. This is just the RGB image. It's exactly the same as the beauty pass actually. So I can just turn off this one as well. I can turn off the depth for now because I don't need this now. I want to create a basic composite, and therefore I will just use all of these passes that we exported. So with all my passes selected, I will press F4 to reveal our modes, the blending modes, and I will set all of these to add. Let's do that. Let's set it to add. The diffuse one, actually I don't have to set this to add. I can leave this at normal. It doesn't make this much difference, but as you see now, our composite looks exactly the same as our RGB, so this is right. Now we can come in here and change certain passes, turn them off or add to them or do some color correcting. But for now, I will leave it as it is. And I want to continue to set up my composite. Now let's go to our assemble composition and pre-compose this. So let's just drag it down to our composition icon here. And I will call this composition now my animation composition. This will be the composition where I create the whole animation. Now let's just go to the composition settings, because actually I want to make this a little bit longer. So I want this to be 350 frames long instead of 250 frames. And I want to extend the last frame here so that it covers the rest of the composition. Therefore, I just duplicate this quickly and right click and go to time. And then we can go to freeze on last frame. And I will just crop this now. And this way we have now our composition extended in the end so that we have a little bit more time to build up our logo. So that said, now it's time to import the logo and get it in place. Therefore, I will need the data from Cinema 4D. So what I do is I import my Cinema 4D file. So let's go to Import and Files. And let's move to my project files. And I will use this file that I created, AE import, where we specified all the data and where we baked the camera. So this will last a little bit now. So let's see, sometimes it looks like it's crashing, but it should work if we give it a little bit of time. Then After Effects will load all the data in, and yeah, now it worked. So now I will just quickly import this into my composition right here. And through the Cineware plugin here, I will now extract the scene. And you see that we have our logo composition, which is actually just this solid that we had. And we also have our cameras. So we do not need this camera because this is actually the camera that has no animation data on it. So let's just delete this. And this one here, the copy that we created when we baked it, this is the data that we need. So we will use this camera, drag it on top here of my composition. I will just rename it to camera. And now I can just delete my Cinema 4D. And I will also delete it from my scene because I don't need it anymore. Okay, now we can take a look what we have. So now we have a 3D layer that is exactly representing the position of our logo, and we have a camera that it is exactly representing the animation of our Cinema 4D camera, and this is perfect. Now let's just extend the camera here, and now we can build our pre-composite or our composition where we can put in our logo. So to do that, I will create a new composition. And I will call this my logo composition. Inside here, you can now put your title or your logo, whatever you want. In my case, I will import my logo. Okay, so let's import this here into my logo composition and let's scale it down. Let's say to something like 35% or whatever, should be fine. Now I want to pre-compose this logo composition and call this my logo pre-comp. Now inside my logo pre-comp, I want to create an outline of my logo to create something like the illusion of a filament. So I will use a very simple technique here. I will just duplicate this logo layer, and on the top one here I will add an effect. And by the way, I used the Video Copilot Console Effects plugin to add my effects because this is a really nice and fast workflow. So let's put in here now a simple choker because this is what I want to use. And let's solo this for a moment. And what the simple choker will do is it will just crop the edges of our logo here, as you see. And this is exactly what I want, because if I now, let's unhide this or let's enable all the layers. If I set my base layer now to alpha inverted matte, I get this outline. And this way I can create something like a filament. So let's set this to a nice value like 10, that it's a little bit thicker. And the only thing that I don't like here, let me change this to full resolution for a moment, is that my logo here has these harsh edges. But I can change this by applying an effect that's called roughen edges. And by default, it will create these wavy lines here, and this is because of the fractal influence. But if I set this to 0, it will just smooth out my corners. And we can also go to the edge sharpness and increase this a little bit. Something like, not too much, something like that. And if we change the border, then it will get a little bit rounder. And this could look quite nice. So if we now take our logo pre-comp and put it into our animation, let's do that. Let's drag it in here. Actually put it on top here. Let's make sure that it is a 3D layer, and let's check out the position of our logo null here. And let's just use the same values here. So 0, minus 495, and 0. And now you see that my logo is exactly in the same spot as this help layer, and I can turn this off now. Now, of course, this doesn't look too great because it is way too big. So let's just select our composition and scale it down so that we get approximately, let me go to my last frame here, so that we get approximately the same size here. What I'm trying to do now is I try to line up my composition size with this one here with this one here, so with the size of the composition, and therefore I have to go in here and put in some small values, maybe 7.7 or something like that. This doesn't look too bad, but it will be probably not ideal. But to really set this up, I will do something else. So let's first of all enter our logo pre-comp again. And you see now I'm missing all these parts of my filament. And this is exactly why I created this frame where I exported the filament as a whole. And I will import this now. So let's go in here and import this from our exports, from our renders. It's the file right here. This time I don't need a sequence, but I want to create a composition. And now I have this assemble here. If I open this up, you will see that this is a little bit simpler because now I only have the RGB and I have the puzzle mat. And what I want to do is I want to create a version of my filament with an alpha channel, and therefore I can, let me delete this here, this is a little bit irritating. Therefore I can add the effect that's called set mat. I apply it to my RGB version, and then let's say take the mat from the puzzle mat and use mat for the green channel. And now you see, and I have to turn off my mat here, of course, and now you see we have our filament with a nice alpha channel. So that's perfect. Let's go to our logo pre-comp and let's import my filament assemble into this composition. Okay, so far so good. Now there are two more things that I have to do to make this work. First of all, let's extend this just that we make sure that it is covering the whole animation here, like so. So let's go back to our animation. And you see now that my filament is not lining up perfectly with my render, with my Cinema 4D export. And I want to make sure that these two really line up perfectly. So I will come in here and start shifting this around a little bit. And you see, I use my arrow keys here until this matches it. And this looks not too bad actually. And I will go to my full resolution for now to really see what's going on here. And we can see here right at the side here, it is not quite the right scale. And let me turn down the opacity here of my assemble for a moment, and actually of this one here, so that we see where the difference is. So the fully opaque one is my logo pre-comp, and this is a little bit too small. So let's come in here and add a little bit to this value. Let's say 7.75. This really doesn't look too bad. And now I can just shift it down maybe a little bit. Actually, now it's a little bit too big. So let's go back here and let's say 7.73. That doesn't look too bad. And now the position is not perfect. So if I zoom in here and again go with my arrow keys, you see now it looks really pretty perfect. So now we have aligned this perfectly. And let's take a look here how this looks like. And it actually really looks good. And now I can just mask out this piece here of my filament. So let's go to my logo pre-comp and let's create a simple mask here on my filament layer right here. Let's take a look here. And I just want this to appear that this is more or less attached to my logo. So let's just create a mask here and along this line here. And yeah, really depending how your logo looks like, this will probably be very different in your project. But for now, I will create something like this. Set the mask here to subtract, of course. And then we have something like that, and that doesn't look too bad. Okay. So now in our animation, we have our logo and it is perfectly attached to our scene. And as the camera travels towards it, it will be nicely revealed. There's a small problem now, or problem, but a mistake here, because I don't want the logo to be visible in the beginning. In the beginning, I only want the filament, the original filament render to be visible. So what we do is pretty simple. We will just move to a frame, let's say around 130, where we have this nice flash here, still visible. And we will just go to our logo pre-comp and just crop it like that. And then we can add here a little bit of an animation to the opacity. So I will just animate this over 10 frames from 0 to 100. Or actually, let's make this a little bit earlier. Let's make this right at the point of our explosion. Just shift it over like this and shift over these keyframes. And this should work nicely now. So as our light flash disappears, the logo will now appear like that. Pretty good. Okay, so this works perfectly. Now it's time to add in a flare, because I just want to make this explosion a little bit more prominent and a little bit stronger, and therefore I will use optical flares. So let's just add in a solid and call it flare. And I will add in optical flares to this layer and place it here on top of my assemble, or actually on top of my logo. And let's set this to on transparent. Let's set it to add. And let's change this source type to 3D. And then we can just set up the position. And the position is 0 and minus 495. This is exactly the same position as our logo, and this should work. And now let's take a look where my center composition is. Oh, it's right here, so this should work as well. And now we can take a look whether we find a preset that will look good here. So let's go to my light presets. Maybe I will take this one here. No, I won't take this one here, maybe. And I think I will use this one here, maybe. This actually looks quite cool. So let's see whether we can create a nice bright flash. Yeah, I will use this one. This looks really nice. And we will just animate this in a very simple way. So we will just go to frame 124 because we know that this is the point where our explosion is happening. Then we set the brightness to 0 and we will move forward one frame and turn it up quite a bit. So let's see how far we will go here, so that we create a really nice and very quick flash. So let's say 250 for now. And now let's move forward a few frames, maybe 20 frames, and let's set this down to 0. Now we'll go into this and check my graph editor, maybe make a few adjustments here. So first of all, I want this to be a little bit smoother in the end. And I don't want it to be so long on this level here. So let's just play with this a little bit. And let's see whether we can create a nice flash here. So let's see how this looks like. Boom. This actually really doesn't look too bad. So let's play this again. Actually, maybe we can even make this a little bit longer. So maybe I will extend this keyframe here few frames. Let's see, something like that maybe. Let's re-render it. Oh, that's a little bit better, I guess. And I also want to extend the duration here of this peak. So let's make it a little bit softer. Yeah, something like that. Boom. That doesn't look too bad, but let me extend this even a bit further. Let's say to frame 160. Let's see how this looks now. And yeah, this looks really cool. So I really like that. Make this a bit shorter here. Okay, and let's see how the size here, the scale affects this effect. So let's make it maybe a little bit smaller, 120. Should be fine. Okay, now I want to add another element to improve the impact of this a little bit, and this is a shockwave, and I already prepared this shockwave here. And I will not go through this technique because this is actually a technique from Andrew Kramer from Video Copilot. So if you want to learn this technique, then check out his website and search for the shockwave tutorial. It was released actually 6 years ago, around the time when I released my original template, and I used this technique to create the shockwave here. So let's bring this in to our animation, and let's make sure to line this up with our explosion. So right around here somewhere, let's take a look. Boom, now the shockwave will nicely expand, but it's not perfect because of course we have to make it 3D as well so that it reacts to our camera. Now I have to change the position here as we did before to the same location as our logo. And now let's take a look. Boom. This actually doesn't look too bad. That's quite nice. I think that it's a little bit too obvious. So let's make it a little bit more subtle, something like 50%. And let's also apply a small tint effect here so that we give it a slightly bluish touch here. Something like that, maybe even a bit more. Okay, so now I have my shockwave in place. And there's one more thing that I don't quite like, and this is the shockwave is a little bit too slow. So I want it to be already visible right here when my explosion starts, because the shockwave will be faster. So let me just shift this a bit, and let's drag it in like this. And F4, let's set this to add, actually. Let's take a look what this does now. And yeah, I think that this is pretty nice. Let's take a look. Boom. And now I will just scale it up a little bit so that it is a little bit bigger. So this is a very small detail, but it will definitely add to our shot. Okay, and then there is one more thing that I want to add, and this is the smoke element here. Because after the explosion, I expect my filament and my logo to create smoke. And we can do this also very simple. So first of all, let's go to my logo pre-comp, because I will use this one here, and I will just create a duplicate of this composition and call it my smoke matte. Now, inside my smoke matte, or let me pre-compose this here, and let's create my smoke composition. And inside my smoke composition, first of all, I want to add a tint effect to this one here. So let's just make this white, that's okay. Now let's apply a directional blur, and let's increase the value here quite a bit. So maybe to something like 125 or 150. Now let's apply a fast box blur. Let's also increase this here. And now let's apply a levels effect. Set this to alpha, and now let's increase the intensity here of this also quite a bit, something like this. And we can actually put this also to white, the tint effect. And now we have something like this, and this will work as a matte for my smoke. So this is my smoke matte. And to create my smoke, I will just simply use a new solid, and on this new solid I will apply a fractal noise. So let's put this under my smoke matte, and let's set it to Luma matte in this case, and let's change a few settings here. So I want to use the dynamic progressive because this has a nice smoky texture. And let's just add a little bit of contrast, something like that. Okay, this looks quite nice. Now I want to have some evolution here, so I will just set this to time times maybe, I don't know, 35. Let's see, it should not be too fast. Okay, this is too slow. So let's set this to time times 100. That's better. And now I also want the smoke to rise, so we will set some expressions here to the offset turbulence. And in here I will just put in a vector and I will say like value, or actually value 0. And right here I want to put in value 1 plus time times maybe 100. Let's see what this creates. And now we should have smoke that is rising. No, it's not, because I used the wrong value. I have to set it to minus 100, but I already saw that it is too much. So let's set it to minus 75 and let's take a look how this looks like now. Better, but I think it's a little bit too fast. So let's set it to minus 55. And let's take a look. And this actually doesn't look too bad. Now with our smoke here, we will do the same as before with our other elements. We will go to the animation and we will put in our smoke here. Make it a 3D layer. Use the same position, 0, minus 495. And scale it down, of course, so that it covers my element here nicely. So let's see, we can actually use the same scale as this one here. So let's just copy the scale value from my logo pre-comp. Now let's move this up a little bit, something like that. And let's go back to my smoke composition and let's change a few settings here. So I think that the blur direction is too big. So let's set this to 100. And let's set this here to 35, just to make it, or not. I can increase this to 50. It looks a little bit better. And now I will just lower the opacity here, quite low. Something like that. Okay. And now I can also just put in a tint here and tint it slightly bluish. Let's take over the color here of this one and then just desaturate it, something like that. And I think that this actually doesn't look too bad. What we have to do now is that we of course just blend in our smoke exactly the same way as we did with our logo. So let's crop it and let's copy these values here to our smoke. And then our smoke will get visible here. Oh, of course, I have the wrong opacity value now. I don't want 100 here. I want it very subtle. So let's say we want this to be something like 35. That's probably even too much. Yeah, that's too much. So let's go back to this keyframe and let's set it to 20. This is way better. And now I can come in here to my smoke again and change a few settings here of my fractal noise, because I think that the scale is not right. So let's increase this a little bit. Let's go to the brightness here, take this down a bit. Just play with this a little so that we get something that looks a little bit nicer. Let's see how this works. Yep, this looks quite nice. But I think now we lost too much detail, so this was not the best idea to crank this contrast so high. Let's just put it like this. And now, again, I made a little mistake because now I lost too much detail for my taste. So let's go back in here. Let's increase this contrast a little bit again. Let's go back here. So this doesn't look too bad, this smoke, but I think it's a little bit better if we change it to add. And the colorization, yeah, we will work at this when we apply some color correction. So let's do that right now. Let's apply a basic color correction. Therefore, I will just go to the beginning of my animation and I will create a new adjustment layer and call this my color correction, CC, and I will use a Lumetri color effect here. And in this case, I like to start with a creative color correction, and I want to use this SL Cross HDRI here, which doesn't look too good as it is now, but if we change some settings, then this gets really cool. So let's just turn down the intensity a little bit. And let's go now to the basic correction and let's just increase our exposure. So if we increase this to something like, not too much, but maybe something like, let me see how the original brightness was. Yeah, something around 2.5 maybe. And this already looks quite nice. So we have a nice look. If you take a look here, this increases our look definitely. Let's take a look here. Really like that. That looks really nice. But I want to have a few more things here. So first of all, my flare. I don't like my flare. So let's go to my flare. And let's go to my settings here and choose the overall color here to match my scene a little bit better. Something like that. Let's take a look here. Yeah, it doesn't help that much. So let's just add another tint effect here. And let's tint it, and then let's make it a little bit bluish. And actually, I will just use the same as on my shockwave. So let's just cancel out of this. And let's copy this. Let's go to my flare. And let's paste it in here. This makes it slightly bluish, and it will just look a little bit better in our scene. And you see that now it is very strong. So I probably have to go in here and change this a little bit. So let's go to our opacity and just turn this down because it will get way too much otherwise. I think it's still way too much, so I will just decrease the brightness here also. Okay, so this has to do now with our color correction. So if I set this to screen, it's a little bit better. Maybe to lighten, and it gets even a bit better. And the opacity here. Yeah, this is everything a little bit strong here. So what I could do here also is go to my assemble and just turn down the opacity of my volumetric light. So this is probably also a good idea. So just turn this down to maybe around 40%, and let's take a look how this looks right. This looks right now, and now it looks a little bit better. And we can increase this again to something like 60 so that they blend in each other a little bit better. Yeah, I think that this is not too bad. Okay, now let's go into our color correction and continue to colorize this. So what I want to do is I want to tint my shadows to be really bluish. So let's just shift this to a region where we are really a bit in the bluish tints here. And let's see how this looks like. This looks really cool. Maybe not quite that much. Something like this. Yeah, I really like that. And then we can play with the curves a little bit. Maybe even adjust this a bit further. Play around with the greens. The blues. Just create a nice overall look. I think this looks really nice. And if we turn off the color correction now, you see that this improves the quality here a lot. So this definitely is pretty good. And I could now play around with my highlights here. So maybe I will just add a bit more contrast. This is too much, but maybe something like 25. Then the highlights, I could take this down a bit. This is way too much, maybe minus 35. And let's see. Yeah, I think that this is not too bad. Could turn down the whites a little bit, but only subtle, minus 10. Boom. So let's go back here and add this in. Yeah, that looks a little bit better. Now we have this nice explosion. Yeah. Okay, now this works. And now, as a last step in our tutorial, this part is really long, sorry, but there's a lot to do, you see, that this is quite a lot of work. Now we have to add a little bit of glow to this. So let's add in another adjustment layer, and let's call this glow. And this time I want to put it right here, but I don't want my flare to be under it. So I want this to be above. The flare should be above my glow, because I will add the glow to the whole scene. So let's add in a glow effect. And let's set this up so that it looks nice. And I will set this up right in the end here when my logo is visible. Okay, so first of all, I want the glow radius to be a little bit wider here, but I don't want the glow intensity to be that harsh. So let's turn this down to a low value, and let's see what we can do here with our threshold. So maybe I will just, leave it around this for now. Then we will just create a duplicate of this and increase this quite a bit now. So maybe to something like that. Now we turn down this even further to 0.1, maybe 0.15. Turn this down even further, 0.1, so that we get a really nice and subtle glow. That looks way better. And now let's create another one here. And let's make this even bigger. So this can be quite big and quite smooth. And we turn this down to something like that. And now let's take a look how this looks like, the glow. And you see that this looks really nice in the end now. And now let's take a look how it looks throughout our animation, whether it is too strong or not. So I think that this one here, the second one, is a bit too strong. So we'll decrease this a little bit. And I think also that this one, the top one, is actually a little bit too strong. So let's say that we set this to 0.08, just to create a nice and subtle glow here. That will work for us. Maybe 0.2 for this one here. No, that's too much. 0.1 was okay. So let's take a look how this looks like. In the beginning here, we have a nice glow on top here. Then we get a little bit of glow down here. That looks okay. Then it explodes. And we travel in here. Pieces are glowing nicely. And then in the end, our filament is glowing nicely, but I think that I will increase the threshold here a little bit. Decrease the threshold actually on this one, but maybe increase it here a little bit. And let's see what we can do with this one here. Looks not too bad. And now I can just turn down the opacity here a little bit to make it a little bit more subtle. Something like that. Yeah, I think that this looks really good. Okay guys, so finally we made it, and I'm really proud of you that you followed me until this point. Now let's just take a look at the final result together that I created during this video tutorial series. I will play it right now for you. Okay, so for a tutorial series, the outcome is really quite good. I'm really satisfied with that. And I hope that the process and these videos were useful for you, that you learned something that you can apply now to your own project, because this is always the most important thing. Don't copy what you see in the tutorial. Go and use these techniques that I show you and the workflows for your project. Improve it, make it better. That's the goal here. You should learn, you should improve, and not just copy what I do, because this is honestly a little bit boring. Okay, so if you liked this tutorial series, then please give me a thumbs up and consider subscribing my YouTube channel. If you didn't like it or have any ideas how I can improve this, then please let me know in the comments. I really thank you very much for watching all of these tutorials, and I really hope to see you soon. Goodbye.